I'm a Studebaker rebel. I love my way of life.
This is Bob Wallaby from Brooklyn. Bob's also got a gorgeous, was it a 57? 58 Plymouth Fury. But anyway, this is a 27 Studebaker Roadster. Tell us about this car.
Well, the right-hand drive seems to tell us it came from someplace other than the United States. It was an export model, apparently.
Yes, they use these cars as postal cars.
Oh!
There's 3 others known to exist besides this one.
So it's not an import. It was the post office doing what they now regularly do.
Have you got any late deliveries for Jim? Okay, you can pull on the head.
One thing we might mention about Studebaker, Studebaker was sort of a little bit late in the automobile business and converting from carriages. They brought the EMF company with EMF company, which was a Detroit company, so it wasn't until about 1922 when they finally built more Studebakers in South Bend than Detroit. Studebaker was a power in Detroit for the first 2 or 3 decades of the development of the American automobile.
This is a 29 Studebaker Dictator, not a real popular name, I'm sure. This is Bob Howe from Howell, Michigan.
Well, Studebaker had leadership names for their cars, starting with the Dictator, moving up through the Commander, and topping off with the President. And this is a 29, and it has a 242 cubic inch L-head 6-cylinder engine under hood. Wheelbase is 113 inches, and it looks like the wheels are natural wood finished. I don't know whether that was the way they were built or whether many restorers like, he says it is. Okay, many restorers like natural wood wheels. That's why you got to be a little careful. People on this side of the car will see and maybe over on your side too, a gate-like arrangement on the running board. That was an aftermarket accessory intended to restrain suitcases. When people traveled, there were no luggage compartments to speak of. They put their suitcases on the running bar and stretched the gate to hold them on.
Thank you. Love the horn.
We'll get these 3 similar styled Studebakers together. I'll have this gentleman pull ahead here, but I want to read his window tag before he does. This is a 49 Champion Regal 4-door deluxe, and this is Jerry Mitchell from Southfield. Jerry, pull ahead for me about 1 car length, if you would, please. Harvey Snitzer, another familiar face, 1950 Champion Starlight Coupe, I believe. And Harvey's a big member of the Studebaker Club and also assists us every year with the Studebaker section of our Orphan Car Show. And last but not least, we've got a 51 Studebaker Commander 4-door. This is Wayne Eisminger from Westville, Indiana. Okay, go ahead, guys.
Now, this is a revolutionary car for Studebaker. They brought this car out early after the war. They did the Van Base 42 car, which we did it a little bit, sold it for a while, then came out with these brand new Studebakers, which were designed under the auspices of Raymond Loewy, but really it was Virgil Exner who really designed much of it. It was a very radical looking car, like the Starlight Coupe there with the wraparound rear window, very distinctive, very futuristic looking. Notice too that the red car and the blue car have these bullet noses, which are somewhat reminiscent of the front view of a Tucker. It's amazed that the bullet nose cars were Studebaker's most popular car, post-war car, until the end of production in 1966.
They were actually the most popular Studebakers, period. In 1950, they redesigned the front suspension on these cars as well, going to coil spring short long arm like nearly everybody else used. Prior to that, they had a transverse front suspension, although independent. The 51, the blue car, the Commanders and Land Cruisers, We're powered with a Studebaker built V8 engine, 232 cubic inch, 120 horsepower.
The Studebaker Land Cruiser was actually a very luxurious car, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was a 4-inch midsection stretch, which gave more than adequate rear seat, rear legroom.
Larry Garden and his wife Patty are regularly here every single year. And this particular one must be a new one to the collection, eh? This is a 55 Studebaker President Speedster, and it is sharp. Tell us about it.
Well, I can remember the first time I saw one of these cars. I was going to Carnegie Tech, and it was parked outside my dorm. It was the one where it was the rose and gray combination. I couldn't believe it because it was it made such an impression. It was a very loud car, something Studebaker wanted. The 53, 54 car is not sold the way they wanted. There was a lot of pressure to add more chrome and stuff, which they did in 1955, and the Speedster was a mid-year model. It was about 2,500 or so.
Still on the way?
2215. And this one is built in Studebaker's Los Angeles assembly plant.
Notice those exhaust tips. He said those are regular factory issue chrome exhaust extensions. Pull ahead just a little bit so they can see them, Larry. That's good. Check them out, guys.
Whoa, very nice. This car led directly to the Studebaker Hawks of 1956 and beyond. So it was a successful image car for Studebaker.
Okay, now we're moving up in years to a 57. A real stripped down plain Jane Studebaker Scotsman. I wonder why they gave it that name. Probably because it was pretty tight on features. This, I'm getting better at this, aren't I? This is Malcolm and Kathy Reisner from Albion, Michigan. Tell us about their car.
Well, Studebaker Packard was having a lot of trouble in the mid-1950s. The end of Packard, the dissolution of that great dealer network and engineering department. The Studebakers were still based on the 1953 designs. And so they weren't selling the way they should, the way Studebaker wanted. So Harold Churchill, the president of Studebaker, came up with this idea for the Scotsman two-door sedan, which was also a four-door sedan and a wagon. The idea was to do a real stripper model. Notice it has the only chrome parts really are the bumpers. The hubcaps are painted. All the moldings are painted. The taillight bezels are painted. There's no moldings around the windshield. That's chrome, okay. But basically, this was an attempt to do a price leader car, and it was very successful because approximately 20% of Studebaker's 1957 and 1958 production were these basic level Scotsman series, which moved a lot of cars for Studebaker, and they were glad that they did this because it really helped them out.
Come on, Mr. and Mrs. Rhodey, let's get that gorgeous convertible up here. Sheldon, stop the car just for a second. Sheldon's driving, but Sue Ellen is the name on the name plaque, so I'm giving credit where credit is due. And it is her car for sure. This is a 1960 Lark 8 convertible. Come ahead, folks.
Yeah, okay.
Come right up here behind him, sir, as close as you can. We'd like to get all the similar Larks together, and we'll let Jeff and Jim go right down the line. This is a 62 Studebaker Lark two-door hardtop, and this is John Riley from Parma. And we'll go down the line here. This is a 62 Studebaker Lark, and this is Sandra Studebaker. How about that, Sandra? I like your name. You know how to live right, kid. They're from Fraser, Michigan. This one here is a 63 Studebaker Lark, and this is Roger Smith from Swartz Creek. Okay. It isn't that I can't read, I just can't see. You stay back, guys. I want all these similar Larks together. This is a 65 Studebaker Commander, and this is Richard DeFries from Canton, Michigan. Go ahead and tell them about it.
Well, Studebaker sort of pulled one out of the rabbit, pulled the rabbit out of the hat for 1959. They came out with the Studebaker Lark, which used many of the same stampings as the original 1953 Studebaker. but with shorter front and rear overhangs and a simpler design, somewhat patterned after the Scotsman, but with a little more trim. It was a very successful car for Studebaker. The Lark revived Studebaker production, gave them the ability to plan for the future, and it was really quite a feather in the hat of the designers who were able to pull this car off, being restricted in the amount of tooling money they could spend and the amount of money they could spend on the car altogether. So they did a really fantastic job. Studebaker also was active in doing certain things, like, for example, the sunroof on the hardtop coupe we see there, and of course the Studebaker wagon with the roof to move forward. They were innovative, even on a limited budget. I understand there was a new overhead valve 6-cylinder engine too, wasn't there, Jim?
Yes, Studebaker got into the modern league in 1961 with an improved 6-cylinder engine that had overhead valves, and that brought the Studebaker 6 over the 100 horsepower mark, and at 112. And I'm sure it probably helped you sell a few more cars.
How many horsepower is in that V8 convertible, Jim?
Well, let's see. This one right here, it's got a 4-barrel, what was it, 225, I think.
Is that correct, Sheldon? 225 horse? What good are you? Come on. It just so happens that the judges thought your Studebaker was phenomenal, so Sue Ellen, congratulations, you got the award for Studebaker. Keep moving, fellas. Keep her moving. Keep her moving. Stop your blue one right there, sir. Stop your blue one. The blue one in the Studebaker. Stop. You come up too, and you stop right here, and the fellows want to talk about this particular design.
Well, the 64 Studebakers were in redesign. They had outlasted the Lark tooling. They needed something new, and Brooks Stevens came up with this particularly handsome and innovative facelift. A really handsome looking car, considering this is based on a 1959 Lark. Very nice front end with either single or dual headlamps. Very nice back end with high mounted tail lights. A really very handsome car.
After Studebaker shut down operations in the U.S. in '63, they moved production to Canada, where it remained through early '66, and Studebaker was forced to buy Canadian-built engines, and they ended up with Chevrolets.
Okay, sir, you can stop right there. We've got a 53 Studebaker Champion Coupe. This is John Stiller from Northville. This is a 56 Studebaker Skylark, and this is Dennis Berry from Dexter. And Dennis, by the way, restored this car himself.
Studebaker's 1953 car was admittedly one of the handsomest cars ever designed by an American automobile company. The coupe was called the Bork Coupe, B-O-U-R-K-E, after Bob Bork, who was the designer working for Raymond Loewy that actually came up with the design. The coupes were on 120-inch wheelbase and were very light-looking, very European-looking in many ways, except for the Land Cruiser. The other Studebakers were on a shorter 116-inch wheelbase, I believe.
The coupes are 120.
Right.
The sedan's 116.
116. So they didn't look quite as graceful. But what they did in 1956 is they turned the coupe into the Hawk series with the vertical radiator grille and with some different side trim, and on some cars, 56 and 57, there were fins as well. Studebaker would be particularly adept in adopting changes to the coupe and the Hawks to keep them viable in the American market, which they did. Now that Skyhawk, is that a V8?
V8. Only the Flight Hawk was the 6. And the Golden Hawk in 56 had a Packard engine. In later years they had supercharged Studebaker engines.
Dennis used to have an Avante, and then he sold the Avante and he went to this.
Studebaker was very active in export, so oftentimes there were Studebakers that normally you couldn't get a 6-cylinder engine in, but you could for export. So the Studebaker was never say never.
Come ahead. I'd say these were golden hawks if I didn't know any better. You can stop right there, sir. This is a 61 Hawk Coupe, and this is Don Delisle from Dundee. I'll let you talk about this earlier model, and then we'll move on down the line.
Well, I want to talk about the two right here, the two white ones.
All right, we'll talk about the two white ones. You're the boss. A 62 Studebaker GT Hawk, Sam Borello. There's the feedback. Sam Borello from Dearborn.
Again, Studebaker managed to pull one out of the hat for the 1962 model year. You see the 61 Hawk there. You see the fins that have been on the car since 1957. Rather dowdy-looking car in some ways, and as would be indicated by the car that's ending the end of its design life. When along comes Brooks Stevens, a very talented designer and a consultant to Studebaker Corporation, and revises the car as the Gran Turismo Hawk for 1962, and that's the other white car. Notice the new roof with the wide C-pillars, the lack of fins, the continuous molding, bright molding along the crown of the fender and the top of the door and the quarter panel. A very handsome car, and remember that we're looking at basically a 1953 car, and with the depth facelift they were able to keep the Hawks contemporary, even though that it was basically a 1953 design. A very, very well organized and very elegant facelift of the original Bob Bork coupe.
Come ahead, sir. We're definitely on schedule this morning. Okay, a 62 Studebaker Gran Turismo Hawk Coupe, Warren and Kathy Gadlow from Livonia, Michigan. And let's get this other one. This is a 64, which is really quite similar. Come ahead, sir, right up here close. Would you pull your car ahead just one car length so the people in the bleachers can see you folks? And we'll let Jeff and Jim describe the cars. Pull up right by him, sir, if you will, right up as close as you can. Stop right there, that's good. This one here is a 64 Gran Turismo, and this is William Peacock from Westland, Michigan. Okay, gentlemen.
Well, again, these are very elegant-looking cars. You notice on the black 64, it has no applique on the deck there. That's one of the reasons, that's one of the ways you can tell a 64. But basically, you got to remember, these are basically 1953 Studebakers, tricked up with different roofs and molding treatments and this kind of thing, and it worked. They were able to keep this a viable model, which is, you imagine any other car you can think of it as a 1953 car still have to be viable in 1964. But Studebaker and Brooks Stevens did, and it was a minor triumph of design for Studebaker and Brooks Stevens.
Studebaker really tried to enhance its performance image in '64. Sort of jumping off from the Avante, and they had a variety of optional V8s available that year, up to 304 cubic inches. One other little trick we noticed on the pewter-colored car there is the encircled T and T on the rear quarter panel. We had another car that displayed that badging also. That indicates twin traction, which was the name Studebaker applied to its limited slip rear axle.
Which was pioneered by Packard in 1956.
Okay, gentlemen, move them ahead. Thank you very much. The Avante, stop right there. We just want this Lark here for now. You just hang on. Come on up here, guy. Get up close so the people in the bleachers can see you. And speaking of seeing something, you can stop right there. Randy Mason's in the passenger seat. Give Randy a round of applause, because like Jim and Jeff, Randy is an automotive historian, and he will shortly be coming up doing the brass era cars when it's their time. I'm sure you haven't lost any of your wind power. This is a 64 Studebaker Lark Cruiser, and again, Randy Mason from Dearborn. Tell us about it, Jeff.
61, I believe, isn't it?
Sorry, 61. I beg your pardon.
Well, again, this is one of the problems I had with the Lark. It was a beautiful, not beautiful, but it had a workmanlike appearance, very simple, a very purposeful design car. And it was so well designed that there wasn't much they could do when it came to a facelift. You can see they changed the deck lid slightly. The molding is slightly higher on this car. Eventually they put a sort of a Mercedes type grille on it because at the time Studebaker and Mercedes had a joint selling agreement. What Harold Churchill wanted to do, the president of Studebaker, he wanted to build a four-cylinder car, a brand new four-cylinder car with a new six-cylinder car, and the two would share interchangeability of parts. But the Studebaker Packard Board of Directors wasn't willing to give them the money. Turns out they were right, because the demand for four-cylinder cars in the United States was practically nil. Isn't that right, Jim?
Yes, at that time, the Chevy 2 never did very well as a 4. Well, this car, of course, was stretched like the Land Cruiser. That's why it was a cruiser model. Had the 4-inch stretch.
Okay, we've got two Studebaker Avantes coming up. I'd like you to stop right there for me. You come up with your Avante too, if you will, please. Bring it up right behind this gentleman's. We'll keep Charlie in the cord back a little bit. We've got a 63 Avante two-door. This is Bill Kruger from Midland, Michigan. This is the original year for the Avante's beautiful car. And I believe this one's probably an Avante 2, and it is. And your tag's upside down. I'm good, but I'm not that good. A 1970 Avante 2 Coupe. This is Gerald Mitchell from Southfield. What's the difference between these two guys?
Well, one has round headlights and one has square headlights, that's for sure. We know that. The Avante was another example of Studebaker pulling something, a rabbit out of the hat, because they needed an image car, and Raymond Loewy and his designers came up with the Avante. It was designed in part in a house in the deserts of the United States, where the Avante team was sent there to be in isolation so they could do their work without being interfered with. Very successful design. Notice the oval wheel lips, the Coke bottle shape, the large backlight. You can see the vertical bumper guards below the rear bumper. They're actually disguising the ends of the springs for the Lark suspension. It's a very handsome design. I can remember Time magazine said it looked like a scared rabbit. I'm never quite sure what they meant by that, but it was really a very handsome design. They were thinking and considering a whole line of Avante-based cars, including sedans, but that never came to be. But the Avante was so well liked that there were several iterations after the Avante, after they stopped building Avantes in 1963 as a 64 model year, and the Avante 2 was one of those examples, but it has a Chevrolet engine, I believe, Jim.
Yeah, that's correct. Corvette performance level.
Wasn't that like a 305 cubic inch in the Avante 2? Oh, cubic inches on your motor, so is it 305? 357, okay. On the first iteration, Jeff, what was, I know that one was supercharged and one wasn't. One was an R1 and one was an R2. How much additional horsepower did that supercharged motor provide, that supercharger on that V8 motor provide?
They actually had R1, 2, 3, and 4. And the 4, I think, was a 304 cubic inch engine with twin 4 barrels. I'm not exactly sure how that all worked out, but they never released the horsepower numbers on the top models. I think they were certainly better than the 225 or what Studebaker had usually advertised, but they were still not in the Corvette League, so I think they wanted to keep it under their hats.
They were still working on a facelift of the Lark, the 1964 Lark for 1967, when management in South Bend pulled the plug, and the last Studebakers came out the line in March of 1966
Come on, Charlie.
in Canada.